College Football 25 Road to Glory. What would happen if we took the #1 high school quarterback prospect and put them at Army for their freshman year? On 4th down, instead of kicking a chip shot field goal, they asked Zaccheus to throw, and he delivered a perfect ball to Miles Stewart, the backup running back, for what would be the game-winning touchdown. They found themselves down 6, needing a touchdown with a minute left, and it seemed like Army would take their first loss in 4th and 30 when Zaccheus made another magical play, running outside the pocket and finding his tight end behind the safeties for the first down. Monken again relied on Zaccheus for a bailout, and he delivered another perfect ball on the sideline that only his tight end could get for the walk-off touchdown. Obviously, the Army hates field goals, so they continued trying for a touchdown, and Tyrell capped the drive off with a score for another miraculous last-second comeback win for the Army. The game was basically over, but Z had another insane play on 2nd and goal in a must-convert situation, buying time with his legs, looking like Russell Wilson, and throwing a dangerous ball back across his body for the touchdown before the end of the game. And the Army wasn't a heavily covered football program, but some reporters began to notice the slide in the win-loss columns and began to question what was going on. And Zaccheus and the Army needed just one more win to secure a bowl game, and they felt confident in getting that done against North Texas, and the Knights finally clinched a bowl game. Zaccheus entered into the game already banged up from the previous week against North Texas. By the time Army was heading into its final stretch of games, Zaccheus was playing hurt more often than not. He had been playing through multiple minor injuries that had compounded over the season, and if he kept pushing, it would only get worse, and it was a hard pill to swallow. A 6-6 record, far from what they expected after a 4-0 start. Despite only 10 passing TDs to 17 picks, Zaccheus rushed for over 1,000 yards and made freshman All-American. Zaccheus had plenty of time to get rested up and healthy against Syracuse for their Military Bowl. Eventually, in the 4th quarter, it was a victory lap as they killed the clock against Syracuse and went out with a winning record after all the trials of the season. He knew what he had to do next to preserve himself and his potential career in the NFL. After failing to progress much in his freshman year due to constantly being injured, Zaccheus made the decision to transfer to Oregon. On the very first play, Randle threw a dot to his tight end Velling, but he lost the ball after being hit, and Randle's first pass went from a 20-yard completion to a pick. Randle probably earned some respect from his tight end for trusting him on the very next drive to convert a 3rd down, and Velling rewarded that trust by taking the pass all the way for a touchdown. When Zaccheus joined Oregon, he had no idea that he would be on the preseason #1 ranked team in the nation, and that he would come in as a sophomore transfer to be the #1 quarterback on the depth chart ahead of Dante Moore. Oregon had this immediate season opener test against an underrated Florida squad in Las Vegas. It seemed like Randle acclimated well to the Oregon offense because while they had a spread offense that actually passed the ball, they still incorporated a lot of read options, and with another elite running back in Jordan James, Oregon even ran a triple option play, so it was great that the offense really suited Randle's strengths, and Z made the right decision to come to this Oregon program. Obviously, there was a lot more talent to work with compared to the Army, especially after Tyrell Robinson graduated after last year, and Zaccheus' father, Zach, wasn't thrilled about another one of his kids transferring, especially transferring out of the Army, even though Zach Meadows famously did the exact same thing to go to Alabama. After settling for field goals on 2 drives, Florida had a 4-point lead with 3 minutes left, and you'd hate to see a top-ranked team with national title aspirations lose in Game 1, and Randle was determined not to let that happen. Z found Justice Lowe for what would be the game-clinching touchdown, and Ducks fans were biting their nails at the end of the game, but Zaccheus delivered another magical late-game series of winning plays that he had already become known for in his freshman season with the Black Knights. After settling into his first game with the team, Randle felt much more comfortable in his second game against Oklahoma State at home. Zaccheus finally got the chance to play with players at his level and throw the ball down the field in an offense that wasn't always in a bunch formation or a 3 running back set. Even though Zaccheus was a freshman All-American, he was on a bit of a redemption arc after his freshman year. 10 TDs and 7 INTs is not going to cut it as the quarterback. Even though he had 1,000 rushing yards his freshman year, he barely averaged 3 yards a carry between all of the sacks and the times that he was tackled in the backfield on run plays. The goal was not to just win the Natty, but to prove that he could be the type of quarterback that could make the NFL, and the Ducks' first half of their schedule was an easier slate of games before their toughest matchups at the end of the season. Besides Florida for the first game, Oregon would end up playing USC, UW, who was ranked 5th, and Penn State on the back half of the schedule, which gave Zaccheus a little bit of a runway to round into shape as the Ducks quarterback. He got lucky that he wasn't just thrown into the fire against a top 5 defense right out of the gate. Aside from one bad pick on a post route, Zaccheus had a near-perfect performance against Oklahoma State, cleaning up some of his inaccurate passes from his first game to improve his accuracy from 54% to 68%. It was a weird turnaround to go from playing OSU to playing Oregon State with the exact same initials and team colors, and after a less-than-perfect performance, Oregon ended up dropping from the #1 spot to #2, which in this modern football landscape didn't matter much as long as the team kept turning out wins. And while Oregon State was 0-2, rivalry games between these two teams always got weird. Oregon was 3-2 in their last 5 games against Oregon State, all while Oregon was consistently a top 10 program. The first half was looking like a weird game until Z found his receiver Bryant for a TD over the middle for the team's first points. Later in the game, Zaccheus delivered a perfect ball over the DB's heads to his receiver Ryan Pelham, a standout sophomore receiver on the team, but Pelham couldn't pull it in, and the game was tied 3-7 at half. And to start the third quarter, Oregon made use of Randle's mobility, first using Randle outside the pocket, and once the defense was more keyed in on him as a runner, Oregon ran a designed RPO bubble screen on the outside, and once Justice Lowe saw space, he was gone for the 60-yard catch and run TD. Oregon State wasn't going to give up easy, though. After the 14-point lead, Oregon got to the Beavers' side of the field a few times, but always got stopped for a field goal at best. The Beavers' pass rush kept getting in Randle's face, enough to the point that Randle started shifting his O-line in the direction of the Beavers' top pass rusher, and that still didn't work most of the time. It was mostly an ugly game with a few bright spots for the offense, but the defense did get the job done, and Randle didn't turn the ball over, giving the Ducks the win in the Civil War game. The offense got off to another slow start against an 0-3 Iowa squad, and the Hawkeyes were running a lot of man coverage, and Randle kept waiting for his receivers to get separation, but they were mostly getting blanketed, and Randle made up his mind in the second quarter to start scrambling against the man coverage looks, something that he probably should have done even earlier in the game. Once he did that, the offense started to open up, and Oregon got on the board on a read option keeper from Z. Randle was starting to trust his receivers to make plays for him, something that he learned not to do while with the Army, and threw a beautiful ball up to Jurian Dickey, and Randle again abused his speed to escape outside the contain in the pocket for a touchdown for a 2-score lead at the half. The passing attack struggled in this game, whether it was passes down the field or simple screens, so Oregon relied on Randle's legs and Jordan James to put an end to this game while maintaining the lead in the third quarter. James got the handoff on first down and gave the Ducks a 21-3 lead that Iowa had no chance of coming back from. And looking at the standings, there was a lot of competition at the top in the Big Ten between Oregon, Ohio State, Washington, and Michigan. While Oregon and Zaccheus were experiencing all the success early, rolling to a 4-0 record, Jordan Akira Meadows and Bama were struggling in Jordan's senior season. Bama lost 2 of their first 3 games to West Virginia and Ohio State. While Jordan and Zaccheus didn't have much time to talk during the season, they had spent plenty of time together before fall semester kicked off. During the summer before his sophomore year, Zaccheus spent time reconnecting with his uncle, Marcus Meadows. Marcus had played linebacker at Alabama alongside his brother, Zach, and while Marcus hadn't gone on to play in the NFL, he had remained deeply connected to the game and the lessons it taught. Before the season began, Zaccheus got a chance to visit Marcus and Jordan down in Alabama. The 3 sat on Uncle Marcus' porch. "You've got talent, Z," Marcus would say, watching the sunset over the trees, "but don't let it go to your head. I know you're leaving the Army, but don't forget that you actually learned a thing or two about maturity while you were there. Keep your head on straight, your nose clean, but also don't forget where you came from." That advice echoed in Zaccheus' mind as the season began. His uncle's words kept him grounded, reminding him that no matter what happened on the field, he had the support of his family, a legacy of strength and resilience behind him. Zaccheus was going to be himself, but better. He was going to actually take what he learned in the Army about regiment and routine and apply it to his life going forward while still being his authentic self. After an average passing game versus the Hawkeyes, Randle turned it around in the following game against a ranked Badgers squad, nailing a deep shot down the field and then leading 2 more scoring drives, one capped off by a Jordan James rushing touchdown and another using the previous score to open up a bubble screen for a TD. And Randle was already developing faster at Oregon than he had at the Army, working on his quickness and ability to escape the pocket. The next game was against Northwestern, and one thing that Zaccheus knew was going to fit him at Oregon was the up-tempo, no-huddle offense. And while Oregon wasn't running no-huddle every play in a 10 seconds or less prime Phoenix Suns Steve Nash style, they would pick their spots like a savvy vet deciding to turn it on at critical moments in the game. There were teams in the Big Ten that were just not built to move up and down the field that fast, but Oregon and Z were going to put them through some conditioning. It was a non-stop highlight factor for Zaccheus in the offense against Northwestern, and Randle was starting to feel out who he could trust the most on the team. Ryan Pelham was an up-and-coming star on this Oregon squad, but Jurian Dickey was the standout 6'2 junior that Randle trusted the most. Dickey delivered 5 catches for 2 scores and 70 yards at the half against the Wildcats, and Oregon and Randle got whatever they wanted in Iowa. After a 4 TD and 1 pick performance against the Badgers, Z delivered a perfect 4 touchdown and 0 pick performance against Northwestern while shutting up the doubters who were skeptical of him before the season. A lot of people forgot that Zaccheus was coming off a season with only 10 touchdown passes all season against 17 interceptions, and up to this point, Randle was already at 17 passing touchdowns to only 5 picks. The key development to Randle at this midpoint of his sophomore season was confidence. Randle never had confidence in his receivers or himself his freshman year to complete throws down the field consistently, and it made a lot of sense at the Army. And while Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart graduated the year before, Jurian Dickey, Ryan Pelham, and Justice Lowe
did a great job replacing their production. The Ducks had an easy 3-game stretch against Northwestern, Minnesota this week, and then the next week against a 1-5 Indiana team, and up to this point, the best opponent the Ducks had taken on this season was either an unranked Florida team to begin the year or a ranked Wisconsin Badgers team, so there was definitely still question marks about both the offense and the defense. Zaccheus continued to make strides even against an average schedule of opponents. He was becoming a more consistent decision maker even when under pressure in the pocket. And against these average Big Ten teams, Zaccheus could just abuse his athleticism to make plays that wouldn't work against better teams. Oregon was only up one possession late in the game, but Randle was never worried about dropping this game at home. Jordan James had a nice run down the field, which eventually set up another touchdown pass for Randle, who fit a laser throw into a tight window between defenders on a slant route. The whole family, including Zaccheus' mom and dad, showed up for their game against Indiana at home, and Randle had this game set up for them to come because he thought he'd be able to relax and get an easy W before hanging out with the family, but Indy wasn't making things easy. Oregon had a goose egg on the board in the second quarter, and Indiana was playing tough on D, while Randle had already been sacked and picked off, and Z was a little embarrassed to bring out the family, and he was just out there sucking on the field. Randle and the Ducks turned it around when Zaccheus found Dickey in man coverage on a post route, and Dickey took it all the way for the score to get some positive momentum for the Ducks offense. But that momentum was wiped away pretty quickly in the third quarter. Luckily, the game was still close after Randle fumbled the ball on a strip sack, because in the fourth quarter, the Ducks were down 3 with 2 minutes left, and Randle pulled it together on this drive and delivered a few clutch throws like he had showcased with the Army, eventually finding his number one target, Jurian Dickey, for the comeback touchdown and Dickey's second score of the game. The game became an unnecessary nail-biter, so instead of hanging out with the fam after the game, Randle got back into the gym and worked on his elusiveness. Even after an underwhelming game against a bad Indiana team, Oregon held on to the number one ranking in college football because of a few close losses underneath them, but now their rivals, the Washington Huskies, were ranked number 2 in the nation. Oregon and Randle went on to play USC the next week, and while USC had an average 6-4 record, they couldn't be slept on as they had plenty of talent on the roster to make this a game, especially with the near loss to Indiana in the previous week. Randle was hoping his time spent in the gym would pay off this game, and without the distraction of having his family in town, aside from his father Zach, he expected the offense to put up big numbers again. The game plan going into the game was to abuse Oregon's speed advantage as much as possible, whether left to right across the field running the ball or vertically down the field abusing mismatches. And not only did Jordan James have a good game, but Randle was using his elusiveness inside the pocket to get outside and extend plays. And there was a lot of doubt that Oregon would put up a dominant offensive performance after struggling in the previous week against Indiana, but it's fair to say that Zaccheus, Jordan James, and Jurian Dickey showed up and shut the critics up in this game against USC. Oregon had a dominant win over this USC squad and now had to prepare for one more game against Rutgers before beginning prep to play number 2 Washington. Oregon got caught with their pants down early, down 10 to a 4-5 Rutgers team, and to end the first quarter, the Scarlet Knights defense picked off Z to add insult to injury, and this was almost identical to the beginning of the Indiana game, and it seemed like the Ducks were starting to be known for playing to their competition. Luckily for them, if they could survive this game against Rutgers, they wouldn't have to worry about playing any trap games for the rest of the season, with Washington and Penn State left in their schedule. Randle threw another uncharacteristic pick with the receiver open over the middle of the field, just massively overthrowing the receiver and throwing the ball right at the safety. Rutgers still didn't make Oregon pay for that mistake, and the Ducks came right back down the field for an easy score to take a surprising 14-10 lead at the half. The Zaccheus and the offense again turned it on in the second half after beginning to take Rutgers seriously and quickly blew the Scarlet Knights defense out of the water with their prolific spread offense. The Ducks won in a blowout, but Randle was still upset with his own play in the game, working on his accuracy in preparation for playing against the number 2 team next week. The game against the Huskies started out just about as bad as the previous weeks had, with the Ducks offense starting incredibly slow, and Randle was picked off early and was dealt with a significant right shoulder injury, severely limiting him as a passer, with both his accuracy and speed on the ball being way worse in this game. Randle began the next drive heavily relying on his legs and had a Lamar Jackson-esque run, eluding one tackler with a juke followed by a spin that got him to the 1 for Jordan James to finish with a touchdown on the next play. And Randle was becoming known across the nation for these highlight plays showing up on SportsCenter Top 10, and on the next drive, Washington had answered with another score, and on 2nd and inches, Jordan James got rocked, fumbling the ball, and the Huskies recovered and scored on their next drive, putting Oregon's offense in a familiar position, down 2 scores, but points weren't easy to come by against this Huskies defense. After a miraculous couple of throws before the half, the Ducks settled for a field goal, but on Oregon's first drive of the second half, Zaccheus got sandwiched between 3 Husky defenders, tackling him from opposite sides in the pocket, and at this point, the Ducks were down 31-10 with 3 minutes to go, and eventually got the offense into the red zone, where Randle's poor judgment on a bubble screen resulted in a pick 6 that would stamp a victory victory for the Huskies, 38-10. In a shocking turn of events, Randle was academically suspended with a sub 2.0 GPA against a top 10 ranked Penn State squad, meaning Dante Moore would have to step up for the game, and by some miracle, the Ducks pulled out the win, leading to questions about whether Randle or Moore should start in the Big Ten championship game against the Huskies. Zaccheus wanted to prove not only that he deserved the start in the Big Ten championship game against the Huskies, but that their loss in the regular season was a fluke due to his shoulder injury and a few out-of-character fumbles from Jordan James. The Ducks started the game with a very balanced attack, using James to run the ball, and then attacking the middle of the field in the passing game, and then finally using the triple option as a callback to Z's days with the Army to punch in their first score. And Randle knew that he needed to be borderline perfect to make up for his poor performance in their first matchup, but also for his absence in the Penn State game. In the Big Ten championship game broadcast, it was first reported that Z was actually academically suspended. Prior to that game, Randle wanted his friends and family to think that his absence was because of his shoulder injury in the previous week. Z didn't want the added pressure of his father, Zach, breathing down his neck about grades when he's trying to focus on winning this title. After the 20-play script at the beginning of the game ended, Zaccheus relied more on his legs to escape the pocket and get down the field with the potential to take a 28-10 lead into the half. After a few runs, the defense keyed into Randle running the ball and kept a spy over the middle of the field, allowing Randle to work to get the ball to Ryan Pelham for the score. And in the second half, the Huskies started off with a touchdown drive, which was immediately answered by Zaccheus and the offense getting the ball down to the 3 on the scramble, and then Jordan James to cap it off. A defense that was almost impossible to pass against a few weeks ago started showing so many holes in the defense that Oregon could abuse. Randle was scoring at will, and the offensive line was the real MVP of this game, keeping Zaccheus relatively clean all game and keeping him healthy en route to his 6-touchdown statement performance that guaranteed a playoff berth. Randle capped the drive off with a touchdown to get that 6th score and ended up finishing the game and the Big Ten championship as the MVP with 5 touchdown passes to 0 picks and 1 rushing TD, with a nearly flawless performance. And ultimately, Haynes King won the Heisman, but Randle got what he wanted most, an opportunity to showcase his skills in a playoff game against Ohio State. Before getting into the game, doing a look back on Zaccheus Randle's season with 32 touchdown passes to 12 picks, having solid game-by-game performances, capping it off with that Big Ten championship game, and then showing you the playoff bracket as Zaccheus Randle and the Oregon Ducks go into their playoff game in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. There were a lot of star players on this Ohio State defense that made it difficult for Oregon early. They got a lot of pressure on Zaccheus in the pocket, but Oregon countered by running the ball effectively with Jordan James, having Randle scramble, and running some screen passes for quick completions. This made it difficult for Z to get the ball to Jurian Dickey, his number 1 option. In the second quarter, after a run stuff and a sack, the Ducks were looking at a 3rd and 20 when Dan Lanning called a jet sweep at the goal line that resulted in a safety, giving Ohio State the ball and 2 points with good field position. Near the end of the first half, Randle finally linked up with Dickey for a 60-yard bomb in the slot against man coverage. Jack Villing finished off the drive with a quick 5-yard out, and Randle hit him in stride, making the halftime score a bit more manageable at 16-7. In the second half, the Ducks O-line was starting to figure out how to block these Buckeyes pass rushers, giving Randle enough time to find his weapons down the field, and he found Jack Villing, his tight end, for another big play. Randle and the offense marched down the red zone and played with a lot of urgency, and Randle ended up barreling into the end zone behind a blocker to put them within a field goal. But Zaccheus had a colossal mistake, throwing a bubble screen into man coverage that got picked by the DB and returned for a pick 6 when Oregon had a chance to take the lead midway through the third quarter. Just an absolute backbreaker. Zach, Jordan, Marcus, and Jeannie, who were all in attendance in Pasadena, were shocked. The following drive, Jordan James caught a ball underneath and fumbled it, resulting in back-to-back turnovers, and Zaccheus and the Ducks got lucky that Ohio State didn't produce any points from the fumble, and the Ducks had the ball to start the fourth quarter. Zaccheus ran outside the pocket and dusted every defender to the end zone. Z did the Heisman pose after the score, but he ended up getting egg on his face when down by 2 with the game on the line and a minute remaining. He hit his backup tight end Farouk, who dropped the ball through contact and was picked off by a second defender, sealing the loss for the Ducks in the Rose Bowl. Randle finished with an unremarkable 1 touchdown to 2 interceptions in the game. Even with 2 rushing touchdowns, Randle knew that he needed to be better if he wanted a legitimate shot at the national title. He flew straight to Alabama for the offseason.